Hi, I'm Dave Watts. Welcome to the fourth part of GSA 100, Front-End Customization. By default, the search appliance offers a user interface that is simple and intuitive, like Google.com. As a search appliance administrator, you can use the default user interface as the basis for customizing one or more user interfaces that focus on your end users, or you can embed search capabilities in other applications. In this session, we'll learn how to create different user interfaces for different needs, control appearance of search results, and embed search functionality in other web pages or applications. There are two ways that users can interact with the GSA. They can interact with it directly, and it will deliver search results to them using HTML pages. Or you can build an application on your web server that interacts with the GSA as a service. Your application would proxy users' searches and deliver the results to the users. With that in mind, there are two ways you can customize the interface. You can customize the style sheet used by the GSA, or you can build your own interface entirely on an application server. The first approach is usually simpler, but there are limitations in what you can accomplish. Changes to the style sheet typically involve fairly simple formatting and display changes. The second approach is more complicated, but it gives you greater control. You might present results in a browser or even a native application. The GSA can provide results to your application in XML or HTML. Working with secure documents tends to be more complicated in this approach, but can certainly be done. When users run searches, they or their administrators control the search experience by sending URL parameters to the GSA. At a minimum, two parameters, site and client, tell the GSA which collection and front-end elements, other than the format, to use. An optional parameter, proxy style sheet, tells the GSA which front-end format to use for its layout and style. If the proxy style sheet parameter is omitted from the search request, raw XML will be returned containing search results and other element data, but no HTML or display information. When building your own search application and embedding search in a web page, you can either omit the proxy style sheet parameter and parse raw XML data, or include the proxy style sheet parameter and parse HTML. Which you use is determined by your needs. Parameters can provide many other controls as well. For example, you can include metadata with search results using the getFields parameter. We saw that in a previous exercise. If you specify an asterisk as the value, the GSA will fetch all metadata belonging to search results. You can also filter on search results using required fields and partial fields. A complete list of URL parameters can be found in the Search Protocol reference, which is part of the GSA documentation. To control the values of these parameters, you will typically send them from a GSA-hosted search page or an HTML form within your website. Let's take a look at changing these parameters. First, what happens when I go to the search URL without them? So you'll notice I've entered gsa1.learngsa.com and nothing else. And when I hit enter, after a few milliseconds, I'm redirected to a much longer search URL. So this search URL contains the program that we're actually running on the GSA, contains a parameter called site, which refers to a collection. It contains a parameter for client and proxy style sheet, which refer to our front end. Now, how did that redirection happen? Well, on the GSA itself, it's configured with a default redirection URL. This is available under Administration. When I go to System Settings, by default, it's going to automatically generate a URL that contains default style sheet and default front end and default collection. But if we wanted to, we could redirect to another URL. So it's automatically generated for us, but we can customize that behavior. Now, if I go back to the search and change some URL parameters, I can see what will happen. So I've got another front end on here. I'll go back to my admin console for just a second, and I'll go to search. And I've created a front end that I've called Show Meta front end. So the Show Meta front end looks identical to the default front end, but I'll go ahead and just run a search through the default front end and then change to Show Meta and see what's different. So first, I'll go ahead and change at the end of this. I'm going to add a URL parameter, ampersand get fields equals asterisk. And by itself, that won't really change any behavior that I can see. I'll go ahead and run a search. I'll search for the word gym. From our previous exercise, we know that there is metadata associated with that. Now, I don't see that metadata when I run the search, but if I remove the proxy style sheet parameter, I will see that metadata. So let me go ahead and try that. I've removed proxy style sheet. And now I get the raw XML. As we saw in the last unit, that's going to contain our metadata. Now, if I actually wanted to just display that metadata in my style sheet, I could change to my new style sheet, which again I named Show Meta front end. And there are two parameters here, client and proxy style sheet. I'll need to change both of them here. Client controls the behavioral aspects for the most part, and proxy style sheet controls the appearance. Once I've made those two changes, I'll reload the search, rerun the search, and now you'll see that it's just dumping all of the metadata out. It doesn't really look that nice, but it's changed its behavior. A search appliance user interface is associated with a single front end. A front end is a framework that is composed of multiple elements that manage a given search experience. One of the elements of a front end is the format, which determines where and how search results and other elements are displayed, or in other words, the layout and style. Other elements, such as one-box modules, key matches, and sidebar elements, define which results are available to the user. By providing this flexibility, administrators can create different front ends for different user needs. Here's an example of a front end that's been configured to include a number of elements that are color-coded for easy understanding. It's not meant to look pretty, but just to show a number of different options on a single page. In this example, we can see a one-box area, user-added results, key matches, organic search results, a sidebar showing expert search results, alerts, and the default header at the top and footer at the bottom. Now, to customize the style sheet, you will have to know the basics of XML, XSLT, and XPath. XML is the syntax used to render the raw results. XSLT is the specific XML language used within the style sheet to rewrite the raw results as HTML. Within XSLT, we use XPath as the search language to find specific XML node sets, elements, and attributes. You'll also have to know the output languages you'll be working with: HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. There are two ways you can edit the style sheet: the easy way and the hard way. The easy way is the Page Layout Helper. This is a graphical user interface that lets you point and click to make basic changes. When you've reached the limit of what the Page Layout Helper can do, you will need to edit the XSLT directly. You can do this directly from within the admin console, but we don't recommend it. Instead, download it and use a programmer's text editor to make changes, then upload the changed version. You should always do what you can in the Page Layout Helper first. Once you edit the XSLT directly, you cannot return to the page layout helper without discarding your changes. There are many style customizations you can make using the page layout helper. Beyond those changes, you will need to edit the XSLT directly to change additional styles, including color and font information. Remember, do the simple things first in the page layout helper before editing the XSLT directly. There are 3 sections in the page layout helper. These sections let you change the overall look and feel of the page using HTML headers and footers, and they let you change individual elements like logos. Let's take a look at some simple customizations. I've created a new front end, and I'll put in some custom HTML headers and footers. I'll use my own website for this. First, I'll go to the website and copy the HTML source. So I've already created a front end. I'm calling it fig_frontend. And I'll go to the website that I want to copy. So basically what I want to use is the shell of the website and put my search results down here at the bottom in those 2 little boxes. I'll just replace that entire area with search results. So to get this information, to get this formatting, I'll need to hit View Source, and my best bet is to copy everything and put it in a text editor. So if I put the entire document into a text editor, it's going to have HTML tags at the top and the bottom. Those will be generated by my style sheet automatically, so I would remove those. And within this document, I basically want to identify the content area that is the actual display area. And that might be a little hard to do. In this case, I'm familiar with the website, so I can kind of figure out pretty quickly where it is. We have a div that contains content. And so ultimately, I can break this down into a header and a footer. So in the header, it goes all the way down to the main wrapper for our content. So we have a div with a class of content nested column, and I've put in a little search title here. So I would take this, copy it in its entirety, and then go back to the GSA and go to my global attributes in my new front end, and right where it says enter your website's HTML header code, I'll paste it in there. I'll do the same thing for the footer. Now in the footer, there is a relative reference to an image, and that is obviously going to break. So if I replace that relative reference with a fully qualified reference, which I just scrolled past, but it's in there, basically what that's going to do is make sure that the GSA can fetch the image. So here I've got the fully qualified reference. So I'll go ahead and copy that, paste that into the footer box. Now, before I save this, right now it is fig_frontend. Just for fun, I'll go back to GSA1, and I will simply change my client and front end to fig front end. So here's what it looks like by default. So now I'll go ahead and save my changes here, and go back and rerun the search. I haven't actually literally run a search, but I just want to render the default search page. And you'll notice that it renders in the browser. There's a lot of stuff I might want to change. For example, I might want to get rid of the logo. I might want to get rid of these radio buttons. I might want to get rid of this bar of links at the top. So to do those additional things, I can do 2 out of 3 of them here. So the logo doesn't let me really do anything with it there, but when I go down to search results, I can choose whether or not the logo is even shown. And the same for other elements like advanced search, search tips, whether there's a search box at the bottom, whether or not there are dividers. So when I'm happy with that, I can save it. There is one other thing I wanted to do, and that's under search box. I wanted to get rid of the radio buttons for public and secure documents in this case. So I'll go ahead and just click on Save now. And go back and reload the page in my browser. Now you'll notice it still comes up with those elements. And the style sheet is actually cached on the GSA so that the GSA doesn't have to do too much work. So we do have a URL parameter called proxy reload. If I set that to 1, I can tell it to fetch it from the file system regardless of the cache. So now we've gotten rid of the logo, we've gotten rid of the public and secure buttons. How about these links? Well, to get rid of the links, I'm going to have to actually edit the XSLT directly. So we'll hold off on that for right now. And of course, I can run a search in this, just like any other search user interface. And it's going to give me the default layout of those items. Before working with the style sheet, you should understand the basics of XSLT. XSLT is an XML language that lets you write programs. These programs accept XML documents as input and generate either HTML pages or different XML documents as output. To do this, your XSLT program matches elements in the XML input and generates whatever output you want for those elements. In other words, it will transform your XML source tree into a different result tree. Usually, for us, this will be HTML. Our XSLT program isn't limited to transforming the source elements in their original order either. We can add or remove elements and attributes, rearrange or sort them, perform conditional tests, and a lot more. An XSLT program contains one or more functions or subroutines called templates. Templates can either be invoked by name or can match XML node sets returned using XPath expressions. For example, your XML document will contain one element named R for each search result. To process them all the same way, you will have a template that matches R. This template will be invoked once for each search result. XPath expressions can be fully qualified from the document root, they can be contextual, or they can use 2 slashes to search throughout the document for any nodes that match the expression. These can match node sets, individual nodes, values, or other expressions. In the first example, we're matching the root node of the document. A document can only have one instance of the root, so this will only execute once. In the second example, we're matching every search result from within the root node's context. In the third example, we're matching the root node, then from within that template, we're calling another template, one box, by name. Our functions are called templates because they contain literal values to output along with the values of XPath expressions. For example, here we see a GM element in our XML source tree and the template that matches it. This template will generate an HTML anchor tag and it will read the child elements GL and GD from the source tree, then inject their values into the generated text. Note the 2 different ways that's happening in this example. In the first, we have the XML element named GL in curly braces. In the second, we have an XML element from the XSL namespace XSL value of select equals GD. GD here again is an XPath expression. At execution time, the XSLT processor will generate the HTML anchor element's literal text first, using the literal value written in the template. Then it'll insert the GL value within that element's attribute. And finally, it will process the value of element to insert the GD value within the anchor. At the very beginning of your XSLT program, you'll have a declaration that it is in fact an XML document and an XSLT program. Then, typically a bunch of variables and templates in no particular order. To initiate the traversal of your XML input, you will have a template that matches the root node. Then within that, you'll reference other templates in order to progress through the XML input. As these templates execute, they will generate HTML or XML content to a buffer. Once all XML input has been processed, the buffered content will be output. In our example, the style sheet first matches the GSP element, then uses the nested Q element to determine what kind of page to generate. In this case, a search results page. Then it will work its way through the GM, RES, and R elements shown. Now that you know a little bit about XSLT processing, let's take a quick look at the GSA's XSLT style sheet. The GSA style sheet contains almost 7,000 lines of code and can be intimidating at first. It's best to use a programmer's text editor that understands XML and XSLT and allows you to roll up templates and other code blocks. For this example, I'll export the style sheet that I was just working on, the one associated with Fig front end. So I'll scroll down below the page layout helper. I can fold up all the categories of the page layout helper if I like. And then I'll choose the option to edit underlying XSLT code. Now, by default, that's going to open up the world's scariest HTML text edit area. And inside here, there are again approximately 7,000 lines of code. I would not recommend editing your XSLT directly from here. Instead, click the Export button. This will download your style sheet. You can then open it up with your text editor of choice. I do recommend that you have a text editor that supports code folding and color coding and all the other things that make it easy to work with programs. So if I just take a look here, I'm on line 1. And if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, the last line is 7186. So that's a lot of code for one program. Unfortunately, you can't really modularize this effectively. Now you'll notice when I move over the numbers, the line numbers, I'll get these little arrows. These are code folding errors in my text editor. I can actually collapse everything at once by going to a code folding menu. Just say fold all. And I'll still have quite a bit to scroll through, but anything that's folded up, I can unfold that one thing to read a comment or to read the code associated with it. Okay, so now if I go ahead and take a little tour of the style sheet, the very first thing I have is the root element which says, hey, this is a style sheet. The very first part here, this is called a namespace, and this actually defines the rules for that namespace, specifically the schema that namespace is associated with. So XSLT is a specific XML language. It has a specific schema that controls what elements and attributes and values you can have. Now in XSLT we can set variables, and you'll notice there are a whole lot of variables. There are several hundred lines of variables. Some of these variables are actually directly exposed in the page layout helper, like show logo. We turned that off a few minutes ago. So I don't really need to come in here to edit that. I can if I want to, but I could edit it more easily in the page layout helper. If I scroll down a little farther, there's a section labeled Google Desktop Integration, and this is what is controlling those links that I didn't want to show at the top. EGDS shows search tabs, so if I want to set that to 0, and then if I reloaded the style sheet, those links would go away. I'll hold off on doing that for now, though. So again, we have several hundred lines of variables. Most of them have fairly self-explanatory names. And if it contains a 0 or a 1, that's a Boolean value. 0 means off, 1 means on. Now, a little farther down, we have a template called My Page Header. And this is actually where all that HTML that I inserted as the header and footer, this is where that ended up. And one reason why I'd rather do that using the page layout helper than doing it directly is because it automatically escapes all of the meta characters that are meta characters in both HTML and XML. Otherwise, I would have to do that manually, which would not be fun. So we have one of those for the header. We have one of those for the footer. So that makes life a little easier. Now you can see in here some of these templates have match attributes. Some of them have name attributes. So name templates are invoked by other templates using call template commands. Here's an example of that. So that logo template that we just saw right here on line 1144, that is invoked down here on line 1164. So it doesn't really matter in which order these templates are declared. They can be thought of really just like you have subroutines or functions in other programming languages. This can invoke it by name, or it can invoke by a match. So if I actually look at some of these others, match equals record, it's going to only execute when it finds an element named record. Now, we could scroll on through this for a long, long time. There's quite a bit of stuff in there. You'll find that scrolling through it, looking for what you want, is not very effective. So in future sections, we'll talk a little bit more about specific areas, but right now I do want to mention that you can use find or search in your text editor to find the things that you want. So for example, if I wanted to find the section where we display a single record, I would need to know match equals R. So match equals R, and you'll notice that is by itself several hundred lines of code all folded up there. This is the code that's executed for each search record, and it does a lot. It displays the title, it displays the URL, it makes sure that the URL is clickable, it displays the snippet, it displays the link, and perhaps icons and other information as well. So being able to find things by searching is very helpful. In addition, if you want to keep track of the changes that you made, I would strongly recommend that you use comments. So if you do change something, so for example, if I go back to that very first EGDS show search tabs, I could change that to 0, and I could go ahead and add a comment here. Like so, and that way it would be easier for me to find the changes that I made. If I put in a date, I can actually search on them by date. Whatever information you think it would be useful to add in your comments, simply to make it easy to find the changes that you've made. Once you're familiar with your style sheet, You can add many enhancements for individual search results, one boxes, dynamic navigation elements, key matches, and many other items. Simply search for templates using the appropriate XPath match expressions. Some of these templates are quite long all by themselves, so it might not be easy. So in the default style sheet, what I'm going to do is make it so that it shows icons for file types, for PDF and doc files, and I'm going to show metadata pictures if they're present. So I've got several changes I'm going to make, and they're all in the section where we match an individual search result. So I'll look for match equals R. Now within here, there are two changes that I'm going to make. So I'm going to show for PDF, instead of showing this little text in square brackets, I want to show an image. And for Word documents, I want to do the same thing. So I actually have that over here in a snippets file just to make my life easy. This is the snippet for PDF, and this is the snippet for Word. So I'll copy each one of those, put them in place. So first for PDF, and then for Word. Now it's very important that I select and replace exactly the right things. If I don't, my style sheet will likely be not well formed, and the GSA will fail to upload it when I try to upload it. Now that's going to show little icons in front of my search results. There's one other change I want to make. Right before I display the snippet, I'm going to display an image. So right here for me, right around 5670, I'm going to paste some additional text. So basically what I'm going to do is create a variable called getFields_image, and to populate the value of that variable, I'm going to use an XPath expression. This gets the name attributes value for a meta tag. And basically what I'm going to do is do that for each meta tag, and for the one where it matches the word image, I'm going to add a little bit of text that is going to build an image tag. So this is building an image tag for me. And inside that image tag, I'm going to go ahead and use this XPath expression to get the value attribute of the meta tag named image. So I'll go ahead and copy that and just drop that in here. And basically just all I need to do at this point is upload it to my GSA. So I go to my front end, and I'll choose my file, and all I have to do is pick the right file, click on Open, click on Import, click on Save. Now, I'll need to run a search. So I'll go to GSA1, and I'll change my client and proxy style sheet parameters, and I'll also need to add a little bit of additional information. I'm going to need to tell the GSA not to use a cached style sheet, so I'll use ampersand proxy reload equals 1, and I want to show metadata. I need the metadata in order to show the images if they exist. So I'll need to put in get fields, and I could just specify the one field, but I'll use get fields equals asterisk to get all of them. So I'll tack those onto my URL, and at this point I'm ready to do some searches. The first search I'll look for is just PDFs, so I'll say file type :PDF, run the search, and you'll notice how I get these little PDF icons. If I change it to doc, get Word documents, I get the Word doc items. And finally, the items that have the special images, they're in the store section of the site. So I'll just search for the word store. And you'll notice not everything has an image, but this has an image. So the image is shown right before the snippet. And if I want to, I can get more items from that directory. Here's a common example of XSLT modification. The page layout helper lets you enable expert search, or it lets you enable dynamic navigation. But it doesn't let you do both, because there may not be sufficient room on the page for everything to fit in some cases. However, you can enable both by editing XSLT directly. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. First, I've created a front end called DN and Expert Front End. This is a default front end, and all I'm going to do is enable people search and click on save. When I go to a URL that contains that client and proxy style sheet and I run a search, I've already configured it to show people data previously, so it all works. But I want to be able to show dynamic navigation. So if I go back here and try to enable dynamic navigation and people search, it's going to tell me I can't do both of those. Never fear. At this point, I can edit the underlying XSLT code. I open that in my editor. And there are two things that I'm looking for here. So I'll go ahead and pull up my find. And the first thing I'm looking for is dynamic navigation. So right around line 233, I'm going to change this to a 1. Now right below that, there's some tests. I'm just going to read through them to make sure that it should actually render my dynamic navigation. And as long as show dynamic navigation is not equal to 0, and there is some dynamic navigation data to show, then we should be all set. Now, however, there's another problem. So let me go ahead and look for show sidebar. And in that, it'll only show the sidebar if dynamic navigation is off. So what I'm going to do is simply remove that entire condition. Show dynamic navigation not equal to 1. Like so. So at this point, I can go ahead and upload my edited file to the GSA. Now at this point I don't have the page layout helper anymore, so remember this is a one-way process. I'll go back to my search UI, and to make sure that I'm using the latest copy, I'll add proxy reload. And I'll go ahead and do a search for Jim again. See what that gives me. And you'll notice now I get the navigation menu on the left, and I get my expert data on the right. But you'll notice that it's a little cramped, and some of this has to do with the length of some of these URLs. So of course, as we learned about in the last unit, I would want to exclude these URLs from the search. I can do that by changing the site. So if I scroll down here and find the site and choose everything except expert collection and rerun it, now it fits a little better, but it is taking the entire screen, so I would have to be very careful about using both of these features at once. Finally, we can use the GSA search as a service within an application. There are many reasons why you might want to do this. As you've seen, the XSLT is pretty complicated. If you wanted to make fundamental changes to the layout, you might be better off just building your own interface. Also, you might simply be more comfortable in another programming language like Java or .NET or Cold Fusion than XSLT. However, there are costs to this approach. Many search and result elements are simple to include, but some are more complex. For example, several GSA features rely on JavaScript to send data back to the GSA. To do this from an application, you have to host the JavaScript on your application server, modify it so that the browser sends data to your application server instead of the GSA, then proxy the data from your application server to the GSA. Your application will have to host those interfaces as well. 3 examples of this: query suggest, dynamic clusters, and click reporting. Advanced search reporting is the formal name for this on the appliance, which is tied in with the self-learning score. Other features that might be difficult to use: document previews. Document previews are not actually represented in the XML, so you will have to use XSLT to pass document preview data back to your application. You can build a somewhat minimal style sheet to do this. Finally, security can be difficult to handle from an application. GSA 7.2 does include a new feature called Trusted Applications to make this easier. Trusted Applications send the user's identity and credential group to the GSA using HTTP request headers. Let's take a look at a very simple example of an application proxy. This is an HTML form. It's written, however, using Cold Fusion, and I have this running on my own workstation. And if I go ahead and run a search in here for anything that we've been searching against on the GSA, I'll get back results. Now, to build this, if I go back and look at my source code, again, this is using Cold Fusion. At the very top, we have a bunch of variables. We're setting a default value for the form field, Q. We build the search form itself. And if the user enters any data, we build the search URL and send that to the GSA by making an HTTP GET request from the application. So in this model, the user does not contact the GSA at all. The user talks to your application. The application talks to the GSA. To build that URL, we're using a bunch of variables and inserting them into this string as appropriate. Now, what we're going to get back is XML. And the reason we're getting back XML is because there is no proxy style sheet parameter in the URL that we're building. So we're sending that to the GSA using an HTTP GET. We're getting back an XML response. And in my very simple code, all I'm doing is looking for my results. I'm not looking for anything else. And in Cold Fusion, I can look for a node set and treat it as an array. So I can find out how many results were found, and then I can iterate through those results and get the text of each one. I may need to do some escaping or unescaping. In this case, I'm doing unescaping to convert escaped character sequences back into their HTML equivalents. So very simple code. And when I do a search, I'm getting my results back, again, just like I would from the GSA. Now, I don't have any error handling in my code, and error handling is my responsibility. When I write an application, I'll need to catch all of the boundary conditions, and clearly I'm not doing that in this example. So it's very simple code. In real life, you would typically have to deal with what happens if the GSA doesn't respond within a certain amount of time, what happens if this doesn't exist or it's empty, and so on. But this, again, is just a very simple program with no error trapping at all. This concludes our 4th presentation, Front-End Customization. Thank you for watching, and make sure to watch the other GSA 100 presentations.